I lost millions in the divorce. Everything I built over decades vanished overnight, while my ex-wife walked away smiling, victorious, and untouched. What hurt more than the money was the silence I was forced into. Her family paid me to disappear, to bury a secret so dark it could destroy all of them. At first, I believed I had no choice. I was broken, humiliated, and stripped of my name, my reputation, and my future. But small details from the past wouldn't leave me alone. A child who didn't resemble me, financial records that never made sense, stories that changed every time I questioned them. Quietly, while the world believed her perfect lie, I began digging. DNA tests, bank trails, hidden evidence no one thought I'd connect. What I uncovered wasn't just betrayal, it was a carefully constructed deception that spanned years. And I chose the one day she thought she was safest to reveal it all. If you want to hear how the truth destroyed everything she built and how I reclaimed my life, subscribe to the channel now, because this story is just getting started. I got home a little after 7, still smelling like dust and diesel from the site. My boots tracked a thin line of red clay across the garage floor before I caught it and scraped them on the mat. Habit. The kind you build when your job depends on noticing what other people miss. Dinner was already half put away. A pot sat on the stove with the lid tilted, steam long gone. Our kid was at the table with a math workbook open, pencil rolling back and forth under his fingers. He didn't look up at first. He was old enough to feel tension before anyone named it. An envelope lay on the kitchen counter, tucked under my keys like it belonged there. Not one of mine. No company logo, no return address, just my name written in Simone's handwriting. Tight, confident strokes, the way she wrote when she wanted something handled her way. I loosened my tie and slid my phone onto the counter. "Hey," I said to my son, keeping my voice even. "How was school?" "Fine," he murmured, eyes still on the page. From the hallway, Simone's heels clicked once, twice, and then she appeared in the doorway like she'd been waiting for the right moment to enter. She didn't ask how my day went. She didn't glance at the workbook. She walked straight to the counter, opened a drawer, and pulled out my wallet like it was hers. I didn't move, not right away. Watching first was another habit. Simone flipped through the slots, found my debit card, and held it between two fingers like she was selecting a tool. "I need this," she said. "For what?" The question came out calm, but it landed heavier than it sounded. "My mom," she answered, already turning away. "She's short. It's urgent." Urgent. That word used to mean hospital bills, broken down cars, real emergencies. In our house, it had started meaning whatever her family decided couldn't wait. Every month something urgent showed up, and every time I paid it without asking too many questions, because I told myself that's what a husband does. That's what a man does. You keep things steady. I reached for the envelope and slid it closer. "What's in here?" "Don't start," Simone said, not looking at me. She tapped on her phone, thumbs moving fast. "You always make it a whole thing." "I'm asking because it's my card." My eyes went to my son. His pencil stopped rolling. His shoulders tightened like he was bracing for weather. Simone let out a small laugh, one of those laughs that wasn't joy, just dismissal. "See," she said, loud enough for the kid to hear. "This is what I deal with. He acts like helping family is some kind of punishment." "That's not what I said." "You don't have to say it," she snapped, finally facing me. "You look at me like I'm stealing from you, like my mother's a stranger." The words hit a nerve because they were half true, and she knew it. Her mother wasn't a stranger. That woman had sat at my table, eaten my food, told me to my face I was lucky Simone chose me. Her father had watched me carry their bags to the car like a bellhop and called it respect. I swallowed those moments the way I swallowed everything else, quietly, so nobody could accuse me of being difficult. Simone held the debit card up a little higher. "If you're going to act like this," she said, "then maybe you don't know how to take care of a family." My son's head lifted at that. Just a fraction, but I saw it. His eyes darted between us. He didn't need the details. He only needed to hear his mother paint his father as the problem. Heat rushed up my neck. Not anger the way people imagine it. No urge to shout, no urge to slam a door. More like shame, sharp and immediate. I had built a career on rules and standards, on stopping messes before they became disasters. Yet here I was, standing in my own kitchen, being talked over like I was another expense that could be approved or denied. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, because I knew what arguing would buy me. Another scene, another story she'd tell later, another way to make my calm look like coldness. So I nodded once, slow. "Finish your homework," I told my son, and my voice stayed steady on purpose. Simone's face softened for a second, like she'd mistaken silence for surrender. She turned away again, already pressing buttons on her phone, already moving money that took me hours to earn. I picked up the envelope and didn't open it. Not yet. My hands went to my keys instead. The back door squeaked when I pushed it open, and the cooler air outside hit my skin like a reset. The porch light buzzed faintly. I stepped onto the boards, pulled the door closed behind me, and stood there with the envelope in my palm, feeling the weight of it like it had been waiting all day for me to come home and accept whatever came next. The envelope stayed on the counter overnight. I didn't open it before bed, didn't bring it upstairs, didn't mention it to Simone. Instead, I rinsed a plate, checked my son's backpack for tomorrow, and went through the motions like routine could sand down a problem. Morning came fast. Coffee, keys, hard hat. By the time I hit the highway toward Gastonia, my phone had already buzzed twice. I ignored the first vibration out of habit. The second one came with a name I couldn't pretend not to see. Simone's mother. I answered with one hand on the wheel. "Morning, Ms. Whitman." A sob cut through the speaker, loud and sharp, followed by a rush of words that sounded practiced. "How could you do that to us, Darius? How could you treat Simone like she's begging? She's your wife." "That's my daughter." I kept my voice low. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play stupid," she snapped, crying harder, then instantly steadying. "She told me everything. You embarrassed her, in front of your own child, over money, over helping family. So that was it. The story had already traveled, cleaned up and reshaped before it left the house. The part where Simone took my card without asking wouldn't make it into her version. Neither would the line she threw at me in front of our kid. Only the ending mattered. Me, the cold man, withholding support. Traffic thickened near the exit. I changed lanes and let her talk. Years in compliance taught me the value of letting people fill the space. They always revealed more than they intended when they felt righteous. Her voice rose again. "We never asked for much. After all we've done for you." I almost laughed at that, but it stuck in my throat. All they'd done for me. Like respect was a loan and I'd missed a payment. "I'm pulling into work," I said, cutting her off before the conversation became a courtroom. "We can talk later." "You better," she hissed, "because Simone doesn't deserve this." The call ended. My chest felt tight, not from guilt, but from the speed of it, how fast I'd been assigned a role without being asked. At the site, I walked my usual route, safety check, quick word with the foreman, a look over the scaffolding. Guys nodded at me, but a few faces held an extra beat, like they were waiting to see if the rumor version of me matched the real one. My phone kept lighting up in my pocket. At break, I finally glanced. A deacon from church. "Man, take care of your home. Don't be petty." A woman from Simone's choir group. "A real husband provides. Don't make her beg. No questions. No, is everything okay? Just verdicts." People who'd shaken my hand on Sundays were now repeating a story they never bothered to verify. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Part of me wanted to type a paragraph back, list facts, defend myself like I was writing an incident report. Another part, stronger, older, wanted quiet more than vindication. Peace had a cost, though. I could feel the bill coming due. Back in my truck, I sat with the engine running and asked myself the question I'd avoided for years. How many times had I let family become a weapon? How many times had I paid to keep the temperature down in the room? By the time I drove home, the sun was low, and my shoulders felt heavier than they should have. I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I called Nadia Brooks, the only person in my circle who spoke to me like an adult, not a headline. She met me near the hospital cafeteria after her shift, still in scrubs, hair pulled back, tired, but present. No dramatic sympathy, no outrage on my behalf, just a steady look. I told her what happened, kitchen, phone call, messages, keeping it plain, because dressing it up wouldn't help. Nadia listened without interrupting, then set her coffee down and said, "You don't need to win an argument. You need facts." I blinked once. Facts don't stop people from talking. No, she agreed. But facts stop people from controlling you. That line followed me all the way home. At the dinner table, Simone talked to our son like nothing had happened, passing him a plate, asking about homework, smiling at the right moments. I chewed without tasting much, waited until my kid disappeared to his room, then stood up, walked to the counter, and pulled my laptop closer. The laptop fan kicked on as soon as I opened the banking portal. I didn't bother with the envelope this time. Numbers were cleaner than handwriting. Numbers didn't cry, didn't guilt trip, didn't twist themselves into a story for Sunday after church. Passwords first. I changed the ones Simone knew: email, bank, credit card logins, then turned on two-factor authentication. It felt strange doing that in my own house, like I was locking a door I'd spent years holding open. Still, the clicks on the keyboard came easy. Work trained me for this. You don't wait for a catastrophe when the early signs are already in front of you. I pulled up the transaction history and scrolled back, month by month. Groceries, gas, mortgage, utilities. Then a line I'd never paid attention to before. A transfer out, tagged as family support. $250. Not enough to trigger an alert, not enough to change our lifestyle, not enough to start a fight over. Exactly the kind of amount people choose when they want to hide in plain sight. I clicked it. Recipient, a name I didn't recognize. Bank routing out of Columbia, South Carolina. At first, I assumed it was Simone's mother. The name didn't match. Maybe a cousin, maybe a friend helping her mom. I kept scrolling. There it was again. Same description, same amount. 2 weeks later, another. Then another the next month. A steady drip, regular as a subscription. I leaned back and tried to recall Simone ever mentioning Columbia. Family reunion? Church trip? Anything. Nothing came up. That's what bothered me most. I knew her family's drama like a calendar. Birthdays, court dates, emergencies, grudges. Yet this name felt like it lived in a room I'd never been allowed to enter. A notification popped up on my screen. LinkedIn message request. I almost ignored it. The app was for work. Vendors, auditors, the occasional recruiter. Nobody serious used LinkedIn to drop family secrets. Still, I clicked. The profile picture showed a man in his 30s. Clean haircut, gray suit, no smile. Name, Jordan Price. Connection level, none. The message was short. Simone hasn't told you everything. Check what she calls support. You're paying for more than you think. No greeting, no explanation. Just that. A punch delivered with paperwork language. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to reply with questions, demand credentials, ask how he knew my wife. Instead, I waited. Because people who send messages like that either disappear or follow up when they realize you're paying attention. Another ping. An attachment. A screenshot. It was a cropped image of a text thread. Simone's name sat at the top, unmistakable. The messages underneath weren't long, but they carried the kind of familiarity that made my throat tighten anyway. He doesn't check. Just keep it under 300. Columbia account is still good. Don't use my mom's name. If he asks, it's for her meds. No date shown. No full context. Enough to poison the air, not enough to convict anyone. I stared at the screenshot until my eyes started to sting. Anger tried to rise, the loud kind that makes people slam drawers and curse. I didn't give it room. Emotion made mistakes. Mistakes gave Simone leverage. Instead, I saved the file in a folder labeled Taxes 2024 and took screenshots of the transaction list. I exported the statements to PDF. I wrote down the recipient name and the account details in a notebook I kept for job site inspections. The same notebook now held my marriage in bullet points. Then I opened a new tab and searched the recipient name plus Columbia, South Carolina. Nothing useful showed up. That didn't calm me. It only confirmed this wasn't sloppy. Somebody had planned it. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Simone moved around upstairs, drawers opening and closing. The soft rhythm of a person who believed the house belonged to her story. I minimized the windows and shut the laptop. Not because I was scared, but because timing mattered. A quiet man making sudden moves attracted attention. The next morning, I called my bank during lunch and asked what it took to add an extra layer of authorization to transfers. I phrased it like a general security upgrade. No accusations. No drama. just procedure. After work, Simone said we needed to drive to her parents' place for dinner. "Mom's been upset," she added, watching my face for a reaction. I nodded. "Okay." In the driveway, before I started the engine, I slid my phone into my shirt pocket and turned on voice recording. The screen went dark. The app kept running. Simone didn't notice. She was already texting. I backed out slowly and pointed the car toward her parents' neighborhood, my mind counting minutes, names, and transactions, the way it counted safety violations on a site, quietly, precisely, and without announcing what I was building. The recording app kept running in my pocket, all the way to her parents' house. Dinner happened the way it always did. Too much talking, too many opinions, and not a single direct question that expected an honest answer. Simone's mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin and asked our son if he'd eaten enough. Her father kept his voice friendly while he slid little comments across the table like they were harmless. "So, Darius," Earl said, cutting his meat, "work keeping you busy? Must be nice to have a job you can hide in." I let the remark pass, not because it didn't register, because I wanted the words on record, clean and unedited. The longer they talked, the more they revealed what they believed I owed them. On the drive home, Simone stayed quiet. She didn't ask why I wasn't arguing. She watched the road and scrolled on her phone, thumb moving in that steady way it did when she was building something. By morning, I saw what she'd built. A coworker texted me before I even reached the site. "You okay?" Saw Simone's post. I opened Facebook and found it at the top of her page, already shared by people I recognized. A long paragraph, written like a confession, with just enough detail to sound true and just enough vagueness to dodge accountability. She didn't mention my card. She didn't mention taking it without asking. She didn't mention her mother calling me to scream. Simone framed it as suffering, a woman carrying a household alone, a husband who cared more about control than his child. She didn't name me outright, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew who the villain was supposed to be. Comments stacked up fast. "Praying for you, sis. Some men don't deserve a family. If he can't provide, let him go." A few men chimed in too, the kind who like to sound righteous online. "A real man takes care of his home." Like I hadn't been doing exactly that for years. I didn't respond. Arguing on social media felt like wrestling in mud. Still, the damage didn't stay on her page. It walked into my workplace with me. At the Uptown office, people acted normal in the hallway and different in the conference room. A project manager who usually joked with me kept his eyes on his notes. My director asked questions in a tighter tone than usual, as if my personal life had become another risk category to manage. "You've been distracted?" he said, careful with the wording. "I've been working," I answered. He nodded, but the look didn't soften. Reputation works like that. You spend years building it. Someone else can crack it in a day with a post that fits what people already expect. 2 days later, a courier dropped a thick envelope at the front desk. Legal letterhead. My name. Simone's lawyer. She didn't warn me. She didn't sit me down. She didn't say we needed counseling or space. She filed for divorce and requested emergency relief, temporary control of certain accounts, temporary orders around the house, temporary restrictions that made me feel like a guest in my own life. That night, Simone moved through the house with a lightness I hadn't seen in months. Dinner got served. Our son got tucked in. She spoke to me like we were coworkers dividing tasks. "My attorney says you need to move your things to the guest room," she said, rinsing a glass. "Just until the court decides." I stared at her for a second, waiting for a flicker of doubt. None showed up. She looked certain. Too certain. Like she'd rehearsed this with someone who told her exactly how it would play out. A week later, I sat in the mediation room at Mecklenburg County. No drama, no raised voices, just paperwork and polite hostility. Her attorney spoke like he already knew the ending. "Given the circumstances," he said, "my client is seeking protection and stability for the child." Protection. From me. The man who drove him to school, paid for his braces, packed his lunches when Simone slept in. They turned my life into categories: assets, liabilities, obligations. The house became a line item. My retirement account turned into a number they could slice. Even my salary sounded different when it got read aloud by a stranger. I answered questions directly. I didn't offer extra. I didn't beg. I watched what they emphasized and what they skipped. Simone kept her face composed, hands folded, eyes occasionally drifting toward the mediator like she was waiting for approval. When the session ended, everyone stood up at once, like nothing personal had happened. Simone walked out first, heels clicking, phone already in her hand. Outside, I checked my bank app out of reflex. A pending transfer sat there under family support, scheduled for the next morning, and my thumb hovered over the screen while I stood on the courthouse steps, thinking about what silence had bought me so far, and what it was starting to cost. My thumb stayed on the screen longer than it should have. Canceling the transfer felt simple, almost casual. One tap and the money stopped moving. One tap and I admitted, to myself more than anyone, that what Simone called support wasn't agreed on, wasn't transparent, and sure as hell wasn't respectful. I didn't cancel it on the courthouse steps, not because I couldn't, because I wanted to see what happened when it went through. Patterns show themselves when you let them run one more cycle. The next morning, the transfer cleared. By lunchtime, Simone texted me, "Mom got it. Thank you." No greeting, no acknowledgement of the hearing, no mention of the public post still sitting on her page like a brand on my name, just a thank you that sounded like a receipt. 2 weeks passed with that same thin normal. We lived in the same house with different rules. I slept in the guest room. Simone moved through the kitchen like she was managing an Airbnb. Our son kept his voice small and watched us the way kids watch adults when they're learning what love costs. Then Earl Whitman called. "South Park," he said. "There's a little coffee place by the mall. Meet me after work." He didn't ask if I was available. He said it like a father giving an instruction to a boy who'd embarrassed the family. My first instinct was to refuse. My second was to remember the recording app, the notebook, the transfers. Refusing would feed their story. Showing up would give me information. So I drove there. The cafe sat near the edge of South Park Mall, clean and quiet. The kind of place where people pretend they don't listen while they hear everything. Earl was already at a table, jacket on, watch visible, posture straight. He'd chosen a spot with a clear view of the entrance. Control mattered to him. He stood when I approached, offered a firm handshake, then sat without waiting for me. A paper folder rested beside his coffee cup. An envelope lay on top, thick enough to hold cash or a check. "You look tired," he said, like he cared. "I'm busy," I answered, sliding into the chair across from him. Earl opened the folder and turned it so it faced me. On top was a document with bold headings and too many clauses. A non-disclosure agreement. My eyes moved down the page, picking up familiar legal language. Non-disparagement, confidentiality, liquidated damages. The kind of thing people use when truth is the threat. Earl tapped the paper with one finger. "This will keep things from getting ugly." "It's already ugly," I said. He didn't flinch. "It can get worse. You know that." I glanced at the envelope. "And that's what this is for?" "A gesture," he replied. "So you don't feel like you're losing everything." I let out a quiet breath through my nose. Losing everything. He said it like I'd misplaced my keys, not watched my marriage turn into a public moral lesson, not sat in a courthouse while strangers priced my life. "What am I not supposed to say?" I asked. Earl's eyes stayed on mine. "Anything that damages Simone. Anything that harms our family name. You sign this, you take the money, and you move on." Quietly. There it was. Not peace, not healing. Management. I didn't touch the pen he'd placed near the folder. Instead, I looked at him the way I looked at subcontractors who swore a safety incident wasn't a big deal. Calm face, sharp focus. "Why now?" I asked. Earl's jaw tightened slightly. The first crack. "Because people talk," he said, "and Simone is starting a new chapter." A new chapter. Like I was the messy draft that needed shredding. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Nadia's name. I didn't pick up at the table. I let it ring out and slipped my phone back into my pocket, but the vibration reminded me to keep this clean. Earl leaned in. "Darius, you're a smart man. You've got a good job. You don't want to be the guy who loses control and ruins his own life out of pride." Pride. That was their favorite word when they wanted me to accept disrespect. They called boundaries pride. They called questions pride. They called any resistance pride so they could label me small. "I'm not trying to ruin anyone's life," I said. I'm trying to protect mine. Earl sat back and gave a thin smile. Then sign. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shove the folder away. I lifted the document, flipped through it, and let my eyes land on the penalties. The numbers were high enough to scare somebody who needed money, high enough to trap somebody who cared about reputation, designed for a man like me. I'll review it, I said, and slid it back across the table. Earl's smile dropped. There's nothing to review. There always is, I replied. He pushed the envelope closer. Take that. At least take that. I stared at it for a moment. A part of me wanted to take it and feel something like control. Another part knew exactly what it would become the second I did. A photo, a story, proof that I'd been paid. So I left it on the table. I'll have my attorney look, I said again, and stood. Earl's voice sharpened. You don't have an attorney. That statement told me more than any clause on the page. They assumed I was alone. They assumed I'd keep absorbing whatever they handed me. Outside, I called Nadia back from the parking lot. I'm sending you something, I said. Don't sign, she answered immediately, like she'd been waiting for this call all day. Don't argue. Screenshot everything. I know, I said, and meant it. At home, Simone was in the kitchen when I walked in. She didn't ask where I'd been. She watched me set my keys down, watched me move with the kind of attention people use when they're counting what you might do next. You met my dad, she said, voice soft. How do you know? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Simone tilted her head. We talk. Of course they did. She leaned against the counter. He's trying to help. You make everything hard when it doesn't need to be. I'm not signing anything without my lawyer, I said. Her expression didn't change much, but something behind her eyes tightened. You're really doing this, she murmured, like I'd chosen violence. I'm reading a document, I corrected. Simone crossed her arms. Be careful, Darius. People don't like men who try to tear down mothers. I didn't bite. I walked past her toward the hallway, but she followed one step behind. You keep pushing, she went on, still gentle, still coated in concern, and the court will see who's stable, who's cooperative, who's thinking about the child. There it was again, the child. Always the child. Not as a person, but as a lever. I'm thinking about him, I said, stopping at the door of the guest room. That's why I'm being careful. Simone's smile came back, small and controlled. Careful is good, she said, because if you make this ugly, you're going to see him a lot less. She walked away after that, leaving the sentence hanging in the hallway like it belonged there. Later, after our son went to bed, I sat in my truck at Freedom Park with the laptop open on my knees. I didn't look at photos. I didn't scroll her Facebook. I pulled bank statements, saved copies, and labeled folders with dates. A man can lose millions in a divorce without ever spending it himself. All it takes is silence in the wrong places. My finger hovered over the keyboard, then started typing the recipient name from Colombia into a spreadsheet, line by line, matching each transfer to a time Simone said something was urgent, and I kept going until the list felt less like chaos and more like a map. The spreadsheet grew faster than I expected. Dates, amounts, descriptions, recipients. Each line looked harmless by itself. Together, they read like intent. I added notes beside entries. Simone said medicine that week. Earl called the day after. Facebook post went up 2 hours after this transfer cleared. Patterns didn't prove motive, but they narrowed the room. I sent the folder to a civil attorney in Raleigh named Thomas Klein. Nadia had given me his name without ceremony, like she was handing me a tool. His assistant scheduled me for a Friday morning. I took a day off work and drove east before dawn, wearing the same calm expression I used in audits when people tried to distract me with small talk. Klein's office sat in a plain building near downtown. No flashy lobby, no fake warmth. He shook my hand, asked how long I'd been married, how old my kid was, and whether there were any prior orders from court. Then he stopped asking and started reading. I watched his eyes move over the pages. The man didn't react the way friends would. No gasps, no outrage. He simply made a few marks with a pen and slid the first document back toward me. This NDA, he said, isn't a peace offering. It's a muzzle. He tapped the paragraph on liquidated damages. And they wrote it like they expect you to talk. I haven't talked, I answered. Klein nodded like he'd heard that line from 100 good men. Silence doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it just gives them time. He asked for copies of everything. Bank statements, screenshots, texts, court filings, any voicemail from her family. I handed over a flash drive. He told me to keep collecting, but to stop guessing. If you're going to move on what you can prove, he said, not what you suspect. That afternoon, I drove to Greensboro. I didn't tell Simone where I was going. I didn't mention it to my coworkers. The lab appointment sat under a generic name in my calendar. A man with my job learns quickly what happens when you overshare. People fill in gaps with whatever version suits them. The technician at the clinic took my ID, explained the process, and asked routine questions in a tone that didn't carry judgment. I kept my answers short. The swab took seconds. The paperwork took longer. I paid, asked for a receipt with the date and lab code, and tucked it into my folder like it was evidence from a job site incident. On the drive back, my phone flashed a notification. New login detected. My email account. Device unknown. Location, not mine. I didn't panic. Panic was loud. Loud got punished in my house. I pulled into a gas station, reset the password, kicked out all active sessions, and changed the recovery email to an address Simone didn't know existed. Then I did the same for banking, cloud storage, and the cell provider account. I added an authenticator app and wrote the backup codes on paper, not in my notes app. That night, the first anonymous call came in at 2:13 a.m. The phone buzzed against the nightstand. I let it ring until it stopped. Another call followed 2 minutes later, same blocked number. I didn't answer. A third attempt came, then silence. I lay there listening to Simone's breathing from down the hall. Either she slept through it or pretended to. Either way, the message had landed. In the morning, a text showed up from an unknown number. Don't dig. 2 words, no punctuation, no signature, like someone had typed it with one hand while doing something else. I stared at it for a beat, then took a screenshot and emailed it to Klein. I didn't reply. Responding would confirm I was rattled, and I refused to donate that satisfaction. At work, I ran my usual safety meeting, walked the site, signed off on compliance reports. Guys joked about weekend plans. I nodded at the right moments. No one needed to know I'd just been warned like a criminal for looking at my own finances. That evening, Simone asked if I could pick up our son from practice because she had errands. Her voice carried that careful sweetness again, the one that always came before she pulled a string. Sure, I said, grabbing my keys. The phone slid into my pocket on the way out, recording app ready, while I drove toward the school field and tried to remember the last time errands didn't mean money moving somewhere I couldn't see. The field lights were still on when I pulled into the school parking lot. Practice had ended, kids spilled toward cars, and my son waved when he saw my truck. He climbed in, tossed his bag behind the seat, and started talking about a drill they ran. I let him talk. That was the one place I refused to let Simone's mess reach. His mouth, his sleep, his sense of safety. At a red light, my phone buzzed with an email from the lab in Greensboro. I didn't open it with him in the passenger seat. I waited until I dropped him off at home and watched him disappear inside with his cleats in one hand. In the driveway, I sat for a minute and read. The result came back as a preliminary report, heavy on disclaimers and procedure, but the core message didn't need interpretation. The probability number hit like a hard object to the chest. Not a feeling, a fact. I didn't yell. No steering wheel punch, no dramatic phone call. I stared at the screen, scrolled back up, then down again, as if a second look might change the math. It didn't. A horn sounded behind me. A neighbor wanted to back out. I shifted into drive, rolled forward, then parked on the street like any other evening. Life kept moving, even when your inside stopped. Inside the house, Simone stood at the counter with her phone in hand. She glanced up, offered a quick smile, then looked away. "Practice go okay?" she asked, as if we were still a normal couple, managing a normal schedule. "Fine," I said. She nodded, tapped her screen, and walked upstairs. No curiosity about the lab, no concern about my day. She didn't need to ask. She already knew where my mind was headed, and she wanted to stay ahead of it. The next morning, my director called me into a conference room at the uptown office. HR sat in too, polite faces, folded hands. The tone was careful, the kind people use when they want to sound fair while they protect themselves. "We're placing you on administrative leave," my director said. "Paid, temporary." "Why?" I asked, keeping it level. He cleared his throat. "Public perception. There's noise, and we have clients. We need to make sure the company isn't pulled into personal matters." Personal matters. Like reputation wasn't part of the job I'd done for them every day. I'd spent years stopping accidents from becoming lawsuits, keeping crews safe, keeping their name clean. Now my name was the liability. I walked out with a box of desk items and a badge that didn't open doors anymore. In the elevator, a coworker I used to eat lunch with stared at the floor until I stepped off. Another man gave me a quick nod that felt like a goodbye. When I got to my truck, the phone lit up with a message from someone at church. "Praying you get help. I heard you've been acting unstable." Unstable. That word always shows up when people want to strip a man of credibility. It's a soft accusation that requires no proof. Simone and her family knew that. They fed it to the right mouths. 2 days later, a packet arrived from Simone's attorney. New filings, attachments, emotion tied to my investments, accounts I'd opened years before we married, money I'd rolled over from old work, a fund I'd built slowly because a father thinks ahead. The documents argued the assets had become commingled and therefore subject to division in a way that would cut deep. I read the paragraphs twice, then checked the dates on the supporting exhibits. Some of those signatures were mine, some weren't. The realization didn't come as a burst of rage. It came as a quiet, cold understanding. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a plan. They were arranging my silence the way they arranged transfers. Small moves, steady pressure, public story, legal squeeze. If I stayed quiet long enough, I'd lose the right to speak at all. Rain started that evening while I drove toward Novant Health. Nadia had just finished her shift. She told me to meet her in the parking lot because she didn't want me sitting alone at home. I parked near the back, killed the engine, and sat with my hands on my thighs. The sound of water on the windshield filled the space where thoughts usually ran. Nadia opened the passenger door and climbed in, still wearing her badge, hair tucked back. She didn't ask how I felt. She asked what I had. I handed her the packet. She skimmed, lips pressed together. "This is aggressive," she said. "They're trying to take everything," I replied. Nadia looked at me for a long second. "Then stop letting them write the timeline." I nodded once. My throat felt tight, but the words came out clean anyway. "If I stay quiet any longer, I'll lose everything." The phone came out of my pocket. I didn't hesitate. I opened the email to Thomas Klein, attached the lab report, the new filings, the anonymous text screenshot, and typed 2 sentences. "We proceed. File what we need to file." My thumb hovered for a fraction of a second, then pressed send while Nadia watched the screen like she was making sure I didn't flinch. The message landed in my work inbox at 6:04 a.m., which told me whoever sent it understood routines. Most people figured administrative leave meant I wasn't checking email. They didn't know I still woke up at the same time, still brewed the same coffee, still ran through the same habits because structure was the one thing nobody could take without my permission. Subject line, "You're not crazy." No name, no signature. Just that sentence staring back at me like someone had reached through the screen and grabbed my collar. I opened it. A single paragraph followed, written plain and careful. "I worked with someone close to Simone. I can't be involved publicly. I'm sending what I have because you deserve the truth. Don't call me." 2 attachments sat underneath. One was a scanned document. The other was a spreadsheet screenshot with dates and amounts. I clicked the scan first. It looked like an old authorization form. Account services, transfer permissions. The kind banks keep on file when someone wants to move money without triggering a call every time. The signature on the bottom resembled mine enough to fool a stranger. That was the problem. Whoever copied it knew what they were doing. My mouth went dry, but I kept reading. The document listed an account number that matched one of our joint accounts. It named a third party as an authorized contact for certain transactions. Not Simone, not her mother, someone else. A name I'd seen before, on the Columbia transfers. The second attachment was worse, because it was organized. Dates lined up in rows, amounts stayed under a specific threshold. Transfer descriptions repeated in a pattern that looked intentional, almost professional. Every time our mortgage drafted, a support transfer followed within 48 hours. Every time my bonus hit, there were 2 transfers instead of 1. Someone had been treating my income like a faucet. I didn't trust it yet. Evidence without verification was just a story with better formatting. So I started checking. First call went to my bank's fraud department. I didn't accuse Simone. I didn't bring up divorce. I asked procedural questions. What's the process to add an authorized contact? How do you verify a signature on file? Can I request copies of any documents tied to transfer permissions? The representative stayed polite, but her answers shifted when I gave the account number. She placed me on hold, then returned with a softer voice. There are documents on file, she said. To obtain copies, you'll need to visit a branch or submit a written request. We can also flag the account for review. Flag it, I said. Next, I drove to a branch in South Charlotte and asked for a manager. I brought my ID, printed statements, and the scan, but I kept the scan folded in my pocket. I wanted to see what they produced before I showed my hand. The manager pulled up the account history, then the internal notes. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she scrolled. I see repeated transfers, she said, pointing to the screen, to an external account in South Carolina. That's not my account, I replied. Was it authorized by your wife? She asked. I want to know what documents were used, I said, and I want it in writing. She hesitated, then nodded. We can print the list of authorization records. For copies of signed forms, you'll need a formal request. Good, I said. I'll make one. Back in the truck, I emailed Thomas Klein and attached the anonymous message. I typed, potential forged authorization, third party named, pattern of transfers. Then I asked him to send a preservation letter, bank records, email accounts, phone logs, social posts, anything that could disappear once people realized I wasn't bluffing. Klein replied within the hour, already drafting, do not confront, keep collecting, keep it clean. That afternoon, Simone called while I was scanning documents into a folder labeled by date. You've been acting strange, she said, voice soft enough to sound concerned if you didn't know her. Changing passwords, talking to banks. What are you doing? I'm organizing, I answered. For what? She pressed. To punish me? I'm handling what needs handling. A quiet pause. Then she switched tactics. Darius, you're spiraling. You're letting paranoia ruin everything. People are worried. People, I repeated. Whose people? My mom, my dad, the pastor, even your job. She stopped, like she'd slipped. They're saying you don't seem like yourself. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Label the man unstable. Then any proof he brings becomes another symptom. I'm fine, I said. If you need something for our son, text me. Simone's voice sharpened for half a second. So you're refusing to talk to your wife now? We can talk through attorneys, I replied, keeping it plain. A breath came through the line, controlled. You're going to regret making me your enemy, she said, and then caught herself. I mean, I don't want us to be enemies. Neither do I answered, and ended the call before she could reshape my words. I sat back down at the table, opened the bank portal again, and started matching the authorization date on the scan to the first Columbia transfer in my history, jotting the timeline in the same notebook I used for safety inspections, letting the paper hold what my voice didn't need to carry. My phone buzzed at 7:18 a.m. with a single word from Thomas Klein. Filed. I didn't reply right away. Coffee was already poured. My son's cereal sat on the table. A permission slip needed a signature. Life didn't pause because Simone had chosen a Saturday to reinvent herself. He talked about a science project while I signed the paper, and I nodded at the right places. When the bus came, I walked him out, watched him climb the steps, then headed back inside and opened my laptop. Klein had copied me on a thread with timestamps and confirmations, court submission, service requests, preservation letters delivered. He'd also attached the final lab report. The numbers were clean. The chain of custody was documented. No room for, he made it up. New Orleans sat 6 hours away. Simone had been posting for weeks about the fresh start, tagging venues and planners, smiling in photos that looked expensive even when the details weren't visible. She'd kept my name out of most of it, but her friends filled in blanks on their own. In their comments, she was brave. She was free. She was finally getting what she deserved. I wasn't on the guest list. That didn't matter. Showing up would have turned me into exactly what her story needed. A bitter ex, a threat, a cautionary tale. I wasn't giving her that. Instead, I spent that morning doing what I'd been doing for months, moving quietly, only in ways that could be proven later. At 8:05, Klein's office sent the evidence package to Simone's attorney by secure delivery. At 8:12, the bank received the fraud claim with supporting documents and a request for an internal investigation. At 8:19, a copy went to the financial institution's legal department because customer service couldn't bury something if counsel already had it. At 8:30, another email went out to two entities tied to Simone's new image, people who'd been publicly supporting her, vouching for her character, attaching their names to hers. That last part wasn't revenge, it was consequence. When someone builds a new life on credibility, credibility becomes the foundation. I wasn't knocking on her church door with a megaphone. I was handing the bricks to the people who had a right to know the foundation was cracked. Around noon, Nadia called. "You holding up?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. "You hearing anything?" A short pause. "Not from her, but I'm seeing movement." "Like what?" "People deleting posts, comments disappearing. One of her friends just messaged me asking if you're okay, which is their way of fishing." I let that sit. Simone's world was starting to tilt, and she didn't know which hand had touched the table. By mid-afternoon, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I answered because it mattered who was reaching. A man introduced himself as someone from the bank's investigations unit. He asked a few questions, practical ones, and I answered without adding drama. He confirmed receipt of the documents and said they'd be contacting all parties listed on the authorization forms. "All parties?" I repeated. "Yes," he said, "including the third-party contact." I thanked him and hung up. 10 minutes later, another call came in. Simone's attorney this time. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mr. Coleman," he said, voice tight, "this is highly inappropriate timing." "I didn't pick the date," I replied. "You're attempting to disrupt my client's personal event." "I'm addressing fraud," I said. "Events don't change facts." Silence on the line. Then a shift in his tone, less confident. "We'll respond through proper channels." "Please do," I answered, and ended the call. I didn't know exactly what was happening in New Orleans. I didn't need pictures from the venue. I didn't need a play-by-play to feel the chain reaction. A wedding like that runs on vendors, deposits, reputations, and promises. When banks start asking questions and attorneys stop smiling, those promises get shaky. As the afternoon stretched on, texts began to arrive. Simone's cousin. "Call me." Her mother. "What did you do?" "Earl, you're making a mistake." I didn't answer any of them. They'd had years of access to my voice. They used it against me. Now they could speak to a lawyer. Near evening, I packed a small bag and drove east toward Raleigh. Not to show up anywhere, not to confront anyone, just to meet Klein in person and sign whatever he needed signed while the facts were still fresh and the paperwork still moving. New Orleans traffic updates flashed on the radio as I crossed into the next county. I turned the volume down. A notification popped up from Simone's public page, then vanished before I could open it, like someone had posted in panic and deleted in shame. My hand stayed steady on the wheel. The road carried me forward, and when the highway curved, the thought of Lake Pontchartrain came to mind. Not the romance of it, just the idea of leaving a city without ever stepping into its noise, while my phone kept buzzing in the console, unanswered, as I drove on. Thomas Klein met me the next morning with a stack of documents, and the same steady tone he'd used from day one. We went line by line. Bank responses, court filings, the preservation letters, the lab report. The process didn't feel like victory. It felt like repair work after a storm. Tedious, expensive, necessary. Simone's side fought at first. Denials came fast, then accusations, then attempts to make the timeline messy. That strategy started collapsing once the bank put holds on the questionable transfers and requested explanations from everyone tied to those authorizations. The third-party contact didn't stay mysterious for long either. Names have a way of surfacing when attorneys start sending letters and financial institutions start documenting everything. Earl Whitman tried to reach me through intermediaries. Simone's mother left voicemails that bounced between rage and prayer. A cousin sent a message that sounded like an apology until it turned into a demand. I didn't engage. Anything that mattered went through counsel. Anything that didn't went unread. The court didn't hand me my old life back. It didn't return the months of whispers at work, or the money that had already bled out in small, careful amounts. What it did give me was clearer. Boundaries on paper, consequences attached to signatures, and a trail that didn't depend on anyone believing my tone of voice. When the house finally sold, I didn't argue over the dishes or the couch. I took what was mine, kept it simple, and let the rest go like dead weight. Asheville came next. An apartment with a small spare room for my son, and a lease in my name only. The first night there, I unpacked in silence, not because I was broken, but because I didn't owe anyone a speech. I still showed up for my kid. Pickups happened on schedule. School emails got answered. He asked fewer questions than adults did. Children don't need explanations the way grown people claim they do. They need consistency. Simone's world didn't explode with fireworks. It shrank. Sponsors disappeared. Friends stopped commenting. A few people who once preached about family values suddenly avoided the topic. Legal trouble has a way of pulling masks off without you touching them. One late afternoon, I drove the Blue Ridge Parkway with my phone on the passenger seat. Messages stacked up the way they used to, but I didn't reach for the screen. At an overlook, I shut the device down, put it in the glove box, and sat there for a while with nothing to prove to anyone, thinking about how long I'd confused love with endurance, and how quiet felt different when it wasn't forced.